Good afternoon and welcome to Discernment Radio. I'm your host, Danielle Palli.
And I'm your host, Cindy Readnower. We are Discernment Radio, people and topics to enhance your life.
Well, Happy New Year, Cindy.
Well, Happy New Year to you, too.
2020. It's been a while since we actually sat behind the mic.
It has. And, you know, I've been hearing a lot of people saying that it's the start of a new decade, and other people are saying, no, it's just the end of the last decade. So what do you think?
I think that 2021 is officially the start of the new decade.
Okay.
But I prefer simplicity, so I'm all for saying that this is the start of it.
Okay. Well,
what do you think?
I like the idea that there's a lot of change in the works. That's what I like.
I gotcha. So, yeah, there's definitely things on the move. And actually, that brings us to today's topic. I've been working on a book, and Cindy, thank you so much for your help. So I have a sci-fi novel in the works, and in the past, I've done some children's yoga books. I've been a contributing author and a journalist for many years. But this one is a little bit different than some things in the past. And just to kind of set the stage, when I wrote my first kids book, and this was back in 2010, everybody said, well, if you self-publish, you're not a quote-unquote real author. And I had published through my business, Birdland Media Works, as an indie press. And my feeling at the time, and still is today, I don't really care if somebody considers me a quote-unquote real author, as long as they're buying my book and like it.
Absolutely.
And that's changed a lot, because now everybody you talk to is writing and publishing a book.
Yes.
So what I was hoping, Cindy, I thought this was a great opportunity. So, Cindy, you being a book publisher and an editor and knowing the ins and outs of book marketing in many different levels, if you could shed some insight. So for this book, I came to Cindy and I said, I would like to give this one a shot to pitch to, traditional press. And Cindy gave me the rundown about the different options that are out there that people might not be aware of. So, Cindy, could you talk a little bit about the publishing world as it is today?
Well, it's changed so much, especially over the last 10 years. And traditional publishers were the mainstay of publishing 10 years ago. Everybody wanted to be with a big publisher, and the image was that they would put you on whirlwind book tours, they would get you in all the bookstores, and they would make you a lot of money. Yeah. Well, a lot of them have gone out of business. The model has changed so that now if you self-publish, you can possibly make more money that way, especially with the ebook portion of it. Mm-hmm. And they do different things, such as if your book is in a bookstore, you don't get your royalties until the bookstores have the option to take books back. So normally a bookstore will take 2 copies of a new book. And if those don't sell within 6 months, then the copies are returned and they get credit for it. Well, that comes out of your portion of royalties or any other books that you've sold. So that's a little bit different. If you're just putting your book up on Amazon or putting it through a distributor like Ingram, you could be online around the world and anybody that carries Ingram products.
Okay, so just to break it down a little bit. Now, unless you are a very well-known author, like a Stephen King of the world, for the average person publishing a book, let's assume a traditional press picks them up and said, hey, first-time author, or maybe it'd be a smaller press, and they pick them up.
Yes, a smaller press. Mm-hmm.
What would they expect? You talked a little bit about, like, they're kind of tied up a little bit. What's the pros and cons of a traditional press?
Well, a traditional press, the big ones, are probably only going to go after big names. You have to be famous. You have to be well known. You have to have a hook. You have to have been in the news. You have to have some reason why they're going to back you. And even if you do get lucky enough to be taken on by a traditional press, a lot of times they expect you to still do the work. You need to have a large social media following. You might need to back your own book tours. So you have to have some kind of vested effort in your time and even money to be picked up. Smaller presses, they still look for new authors, and they may not have all the financial backing behind them that a traditional press does, but they have the experience, and that's what you need as a first-time author or somebody who's maybe self-published before. They can help you with connections, they can help you with the marketing, but you still have to have some reason that they want to take you on.
Yeah, and it sounds like a middle ground. So you might get some small advance from them. You might get royalties. They might, I would think, take on some of the responsibility of advertising and marketing. But from what I understood from what you told me, it's a little more of a collaborative. They're not going to do everything. You still have to participate.
Right.
So we've gotten the main traditional press, the smaller press, and can you talk a little bit about indie press, which is what you do, and how the pros and cons of that as well?
Well, basically, when you're doing it yourself, you're finding somebody like me who knows how to format the book, so you know how Ingram expects it to be. They used to use the term typeset, but now it's formatted. But as far as making sure that your fonts are embedded and everything is checked out so that a printer reads the file and everything prints correctly. As far as an ebook goes, you have to know exactly how to format that. You need to know about ISBN numbers. You need to know about Library of Congress numbers and have the regular publishing knowledge. And that's why you'd go to an indie publisher.
Gotcha. And people already, I can kind of hear them on the other end, like their head is spinning. Because when I was first experienced to this, it was like one thing after another. They're like, I have to do that now I have to do that. And you realize you do need support. And I know too many authors who think the book's done. You know, where's my spot on Oprah? Where's Oprah?
Oh, yeah. I've heard that so many times.
And and once you start to tell them, well, this is what needs to happen. Like, you wrote the book. You're 10% there. Now here's the next 90% while you market it.
That's right.
You know, so can you give them, you touched on it a little bit. So somebody has a book that they've written. It's done. What would be the first recommendation as far as they're handing it to you or an editor? What's the first part of the process?
First off, you definitely need a well-edited book. People are brutal when it comes down to their reviews online, and you don't want to risk that because you can get a negative review just because they don't like it. You can get a negative review because they didn't get their shipment in time, but you can't take down a review.
I got Star taken off because the book arrived with the cover bent, and I had nothing to do with that.
Isn't that frustrating?
I'm sorry, reader number 37.
I know, that's so tough to have to deal with. But so what you want to do is make sure you control everything that you can control, which is editing, formatting, making sure that the book is appealing. A cover makes such a big difference, a nice cover. You have to think about when you're looking on Amazon, who has 80% of the book business, you have to compete against hundreds, if not thousands, of other books that just have a little 1-inch thumbnail. So how are you going to stand out?
Yeah.
And nowadays, because of the way Amazon does the books, I can sometimes search for an author and the book name, and it will not be the first one that pops up. So Amazon is using their own algorithms to say, oh no, I think you might actually like this book. Even though you actually match the title and the author, they will say that you might like this book better. And I'll have to search 3 pages down just to find the actual book I was searching for. So there's just so many differences nowadays, and there's a lot of people that advertise on Amazon. You know, those sponsored ads that you see below a book that you're searching for that pops up. People are paying for that. They're bidding on keywords to be able to pop up before somebody else does.
Yeah, and there's a couple of really good things you mentioned in there. Number one, I know too many people who want to self-edit. Now, I work as an editor. And I've edited for other people. I would not touch my own work because your brain is going to autocorrect.
It does.
And you're going to read it the way you think it should be. The other thing I did, in addition to 2 editors, you have your main edit and your proofing. And I was open to even developmental editing if the reviews came back with my test readers that more was needed. And that was the other thing. We had, you and some other people as test readers to say, here's what was confusing, here's what didn't make sense about this, so I could go and do a rewrite. And so a lot of people write a book, they don't take the reviews, they're worried about the reviews after it's out there, but get a little feedback to start with. It's no guarantee that everybody's going to love it because you're not going to please everybody. But we did the test readers, we did the editing, I hired Joan Peters to do the cover, and I actually changed the color based on your feedback, saying, hey, if you're looking at a thumbnail, what's going to pop out.
Right.
So, and then on the marketing end, there's a lot that actually warrants like more episodes than what we can cover here. So they have the book, it's ready to go. Assuming they're going to go indie press and publish on their own, what kind of financial investment? Is it very scalable as far as what they need to do to market and get it out there?
Well, the marketing is pretty much anything you can do for free all the way up to paying thousands of dollars, depending on what you want to do. One of the great things, if you have also produced an ebook, is to use Amazon's KDP Select. And what that means is that for 90 days, you're giving the ebook version exclusivity to Amazon. And then for 5 of those days, you're either going to give it away for free or at a discounted rate. And by doing that, and that's free, you don't have to pay to do that. And by doing that, there's a whole lot of websites and bloggers who have massive email lists of people who want to know when a book is free. So you can take out a small ad with them or tweets, whatever they have to sell to show to their list. And some of these lists can be 400,000, 1 million people. And as I've been in publishing longer, I'm seeing more and more of these sites with massive lists. So for $30, $59, $75, you may be able to take out an ad with them, and then they're going to see that your book is free. Now, a lot of people will say, I don't want to give my book away for free. I want to sell it. But you need reviews. So say you have 1,000 downloads of a free book. Maybe you're going to get 10 reviews if you're lucky, because people just don't make the effort.
Yeah.
But you at least have that possibility. You also have the possibility of people starting to talk about it on social media. So if you have a good book, or you have something very different or unusual or a hook that people don't see all the time, then you have a great option doing KDP Select.
Yeah, and you put me onto something that I did not realize. As somebody who ignores her own Twitter page in favor of monitoring everybody else's for work, I was just never that interested in it. And here you are saying that if you're pitching, say, to a traditional press, say, they want to know that you have a following. And that helps, of course, with indie press as well. But to be able to show people, I have 50,000 people who are following this. I have, this book in the works. And I would think that they want to know that you have something else in the works.
Right.
So share with us a success story before mine gets out there and hopefully is
is the biggest success story. Well, I have one author I've worked with. He's got 5 picture books out, and his latest book is geared more towards middle school, high school, young adult. The book's name is Ricardo's Extraordinary Journey, A Boy's Mystical Quest for Fame, Fortune, and Adventure. It's an adventure book about a 15-year-old in the 14th century, and he encounters all sorts of famous characters and actually gets to experience history. Kind of think about like Forrest Gump meets Harry Potter in a way. And it's well written. It's quite an adventure. And then at the end of the book, he also did extensive appendices of all the foods, the international foods that were featured, the locations, the Silk Road, so that if a middle schooler or high schooler needed to write a book report, this would be perfect, because they could be referring to all this great information in the back of the book, and they could create a great report on that. But one of the things we did was we found categories that were very particular to this book. And by finding a category that really zeroes in on the book, that ranked him so much higher than having to compete in, say, children's fiction, which is a wide with millions of people in it. So that was able to get attention of people quickly. And so we used that as part of our marketing campaign. And then we also used sponsored ads with Amazon. And these sponsored ads allow you to bid on keywords against other authors. You can set the amount you want to spend per day, the amount you're willing to pay per click, and you give Amazon a list of the keywords. And what we did was we researched authors in that age group that would be similar, such as Diary of a Wimpy Kid or Harry Potter, and Chris Colfer, who is a famous author now who used to be on The Glee Show. And so if you have people searching for those terms, then you're going to pay money to put your sponsored ad underneath where that book shows up. And hopefully they'll click on it and buy it. And we have been seeing a lot of success. We've seen that he has appeared over 2 million times on searches, and that what they call the A cost, which is the cost of sales versus the cost he's paying, is going down, which means that the longer the campaign goes, the less he's actually having to pay to get that click and make that sale.
And I imagine that, and this is Rich Bergman we're talking about.
Rich Bergman, yes.
So I imagine that they click on this book, and then after they like this book, then it's bumping all the other books up as well, even if they're in slightly different categories. Is that correct?
Yes, except his are very different because of the age group. But yes, that's the theory that yes, it would. And when you have a series, like I know you're planning to write a series, that makes it easier to sell the second book and the third book and the fourth book, because if they like your first book, it will pop up as you may like this on the Amazon searches.
It's also a lot easier to write the second book than the first book, I'm finding out.
Really? Now tell me why that is.
So the first book took forever because I've written kids' books. I have been a journalist and written short articles. A full-length novel was brand new to me. And I went through a lot of the books on how you're supposed to do it. And it just wasn't coming together. You know, I'd go through and I'd list my characters and their backstories. I'd write their long backstory. I'd write the scenes I wanted to use. I'd have their dialogue so I remembered who spoke in what way. And yet, when I went to outline, I'd have all these disjointed ideas that I couldn't quite fit together. So, and because we talk a lot about meditation, I meditated one day, and the little internal voice that is me said, well, why don't you just sit down and write whatever scene comes to you that day? So I did that for the next few months, and it started flowing.
Nice.
And there were scenes that I didn't end up using, and there was a lot of times that I was repetitive, and I realized, oh, you know what? That person doesn't have privy to that information yet, so I need to change it. So it took a lot of extra time to rewrite, but using, I was using Scrivener where I could rearrange the chapters easily. Nice. So then I could look at it and see and read where there's continuity errors and things. And of course there's more. Because I'm writing it out of order. But when I did that, not only did it flow, but I found that I got to know the characters so well that I didn't have to remember who spoke a certain way. In fact, one of the things I did as an exercise was try to look online. It didn't have to be an actor or celebrity, but find somebody who sort of looked like the character, and so that I could and then I might say, well, they look sort of like that, but maybe a little more like this, and I'd have to get them so vivid in my head that if they knocked on the door, I wouldn't be surprised.
Interesting.
And so, and then it took years for the first part, and then suddenly it was very fast toward the end. Book number 2, I'm a month in, and I've got 17,000 words down.
Wow.
And that's stopping to edit this book and make revisions and stuff as we need to. And I think because I took the time to set the characters, the setting, the outline, the backstory, even though it took forever to get it to sync, once it was all together, now it's just like, oh, we're picking up where we left off. Now that's today. We'll see what happens 3 months, but I'm noticing the flow is much faster.
When I work with authors, that is the one thing that I hear so much of, that they get out of the flow and they can't get back into it. Yeah. And that's gut-wrenching for a lot of them because they want to get it done, they want to move on, and it just doesn't go anymore.
Particularly if you're like you and I and you have other obligations, with full-time projects that we're doing. So I'm trying to get to the point where every single day, you hear every writer out there who's been published numerous times say you need to write every day. Now, I do write every day for my job, but some of it's professional writing, not creative. Right. So I'm trying to do something a little creative each day. If I miss a day, I'm not going to beat myself up, but I can't go a month and then say, hey, let me pick up on my book, because the flow is just not going to be there.
Right.
If more than a couple days goes by, then I'm looking at a blank screen thinking, where do I want to go from here?
And, it's interesting the way you say you know your characters so well. I've actually edited books where the character name changes halfway.
So have I. And they say things that you start to realize, like I'll say something and I'm like, I don't really think they would respond that way. Kind of like a friend who's going to get angry about something, and then you can't write them being kind-hearted when no, that would tick them off.
Right. So one of the things I always read online is that one of the first rules of writing is show, don't tell. Yeah. So have you run into that, and how do you deal with that?
I ran into that quite a bit on this first one because I tend to be really strong with dialogue. And so there's a tendency for me to say, this happened, and here's why they're thinking that. And then when I want to fill in the backstory, so what I essentially did is I'll write a scene and I'll have the dialogue flow. But you've got people floating in midair. So then on the second pass, I would go through and say, here's what this person looks like, here's what this person's wearing, here's what the room looks like, and kind of work it in. So it doesn't look like, and do it in a way that's not so distracting. Because have you read a book where there's dialogue and then there's 5 pages describing the room and you forgot what the conversation was about?
Yes.
So I was trying to intermix like the descriptions. And in my case, I used a lot of flashbacks. Mm-hmm. And one of the great feedback that actually came from my husband was on the chapter heads, give them some point in time. Like I have an assembly, so he'll say, just say, 5 months before the assembly, 3 days after it, so that when you flash back, you can show those stories, not tell. Mm-hmm. Because I read a lot of books where they'll say, oh, remember 10 years ago when we did this? Well, I would rather get a snapshot, a vignette of that action.
Right.
And if you set it up right, people, I think, will go with you and enjoy it more if they're living that piece, even, versus trying to tell somebody. So I did a little bit of telling in the dialogue, but I tried to keep it at a minimum. Like if there was a way to show it, I was going to show it. Mm-hmm.
So your book is a science fiction book. So how did you come up with the idea for it? And do you read a lot of science fiction? Is that one of your favorite genres? I'm
starting to.
Okay.
What's funny is I was not, when this idea first came to me, this actually started like 5 years ago with the idea popped in my brain. Mm-hmm. And my husband's the sci-fi fanatic. I was kind of like the cozy mystery. I thought the first book I'm going to write is a cozy mystery.
Interesting.
And then I had 2 ideas for a book, and I actually wrote down the synopsis. I posted on Facebook, here's my unofficial test, which one do you like? And the other one was also more fantasy-based. So they both were. The other was a little more metaphysically minded. Well, I really shouldn't say that considering where this book is going. But this is a little more sci-fi. That's a little more fantasy. I think, in that regards.
Thanks for listening to our discussion on writing and publishing. If you enjoyed part 1 of this discussion, please tune in to part 2.